Have you ever wondered how money really moves around the world? It seems simple. Tap a card, send a wire, and funds appear across the globe. But beneath that simplicity, the US dollar dominates global trade, and the networks that move it are largely under American influence. Now China is building its own highways for money, bypassing the old roads. Their CIPS system lets money move across borders using the yuan, a direct challenge to the old order. The dominance of the dollar faces its biggest test yet. The stakes, the balance of power for the next century. The US-China trade war began not with a bang, but with escalating tariffs and retaliations that shook the global economy. What started as a dispute over trade balances soon became a broader strategic competition. The US imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions in Chinese imports, aiming to disrupt supply chains and encourage companies to move production elsewhere. China responded in kind, but the real wake-up call was the realization of how much leverage the US held over its economy, not just through trade but through financial power. Washington began using sanctions to cut Chinese companies off from American technology and financial services. This exposed a critical vulnerability: China's reliance on the global dollar system managed through SWIFT. If the US escalated, it could potentially disconnect Chinese banks from the world's financial arteries. This fear became a catalyst for change. Chinese leaders saw that true global power required monetary sovereignty. The trade war, meant to curb China's rise, instead motivated Beijing to build its own financial infrastructure. The focus shifted from participating in the existing system to creating a viable alternative. The seeds of CIPs were sown long before, but the trade war made them grow. Now China is determined to insulate its economy from American political pressure. The unintended consequence: a parallel financial world is emerging. The global order is being rewritten, one transaction at a time. In response to rising tensions, China launched the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS. Its purpose to process international payments in yuan, making cross-border transactions faster and cheaper. Before CIPS, sending yuan abroad was slow and costly, often routed through offshore banks and converted to dollars. CIPS changed that, connecting Chinese and global banks for direct, real-time settlements. It's a financial superhighway for the yuan, built for speed and efficiency. More than a technical upgrade, CIPS is a strategic shield. If Chinese banks are ever cut off from the dollar system, CIPS provides a lifeline for trade with friendly nations. Adoption was slow at first, but as the trade war intensified, its importance grew. China began promoting CIPS to its trading partners, especially those in the Belt and Road Initiative. The message: join our system, use our currency, and insulate your trade from US political whims. CIPS has become a key pillar of China's foreign policy. The world is taking notice. To grasp CIPS's significance, you need to understand the giant it challenges: SWIFT. SWIFT is a secure messaging network banks use to send payment instructions worldwide, over 11,000 institutions in 200+ countries. It's the backbone of global finance, but it doesn't move money itself. CIPS, by contrast, is both a messaging and settlement system, handling instructions and the actual transfer of yuan. This integration makes CIPS efficient and gives China direct oversight. While SWIFT is governed by a cooperative in Belgium, the US wields immense influence, especially since most messages involve dollars. Washington can pressure SWIFT to disconnect countries or banks, as it did with Iran. For China and others, this is a political risk. Their economic lifelines are subject to US decisions. CIPS offers an escape: a Chinese system, under Chinese law, immune to US sanctions. For countries trading with China, especially those under sanctions, CIPS is a secure channel. SWIFT offers global reach. CIPS offers geopolitical insulation. The choice is no longer just about cost or speed, it's about sovereignty. As the world fractures, the value of that insulation grows. The financial order is no longer unipolar. Nations now have a real alternative. The era of a single global system is ending. CIPS's expansion is most visible in Asia, where China's influence is strongest. The Belt and Road Initiative has been the main vehicle, with China financing infrastructure and building the financial plumbing to match. Loans are increasingly denominated in yuan, and payments processed through CIPS. In Pakistan, major banks are direct CIPS participants, facilitating massive projects like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In Southeast Asia, Banks in Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia are settling more trade with China via CIPS. By early 2025, over 80 financial institutions in ASEAN nations were connected to CIPS. In 2024 alone, CIPS processed over 130 trillion yuan, about $18 trillion, a staggering rise. Much of this growth is from Asia, where trade with China is shifting away from the dollar. China and Russia now conduct most trade in their own currencies, bypassing SWIFT entirely. This financial alliance, forged under Western sanctions, is a model for others seeking to de-dollarize. By joining CIPS, Asian banks are betting on China's rise and diversifying away from the West. The more banks that join, the more attractive CIPS becomes. China is building not just a payment system but a new financial community. The modern Silk Road for money is here. In Africa, China's economic footprint has paved the way for financial expansion. As the continent's largest trading partner, China's projects have created demand for efficient financial channels. Many African nations, facing dollar shortages, see the yuan as a practical alternative. China has set up yuan clearing centers in countries like South Africa and Zambia, connecting local banks to CIPS. Major African banks now offer yuan services, making trade with China smoother and less dependent on the dollar. For Africa, this reduces exposure to US policy shifts. For China, it secures vital resources. Central banks in Nigeria and Ghana have added the yuan to reserves, and currency swap agreements bypass the dollar entirely. This is slowly creating an alternative economic bloc. While the dollar remains dominant, Africa's financial future is tilting eastward. The geopolitical consequences will be profound. Control of financial plumbing is about raw power. For decades, the US has used its central role in global finance as a foreign policy tool. Cutting off access to the dollar can cripple economies. The rise of CIPS challenges this leverage. Every transaction through CIPS is outside US oversight and sanctions. This reduces American influence, especially in critical sectors like rare earths, where China dominates. If China sells these minerals exclusively in yuan via CIPS, even US allies may have to use the Chinese system. A yuan-based trading bloc shifts global trade dynamics, creating a new economic sphere where China sets the rules. Countries in this bloc may find their interests aligning more with Beijing. The world could fragment into a dollar bloc and a yuan bloc, making global consensus harder. This is already happening. Russia's pivot to China after Western sanctions is proof. Their trade, now conducted in yuan and rubles through CIPS, has boomed. There is now a viable plan B to the dollar system. The flow of global power is being rerouted. The implications are enormous. Could the yuan one day challenge the dollar as the world's reserve currency? The dollar's dominance has lasted over 70 years, giving the US immense advantages. The yuan still accounts for only a small fraction of global reserves and payments. Major hurdles remain. The yuan isn't fully convertible, China's markets aren't fully open, and legal transparency is lacking. But China is playing a different game, using its status as the world's largest trading nation to create a trade-based currency bloc. Through CIPS and the Belt and Road Initiative, China is building an ecosystem where the yuan is the practical choice for commerce. The yuan's internationalization is driven by trade, not financial openness. This could lead to a world with multiple reserve currencies. The dollar may remain dominant in the West, while the yuan leads in China's economic network. This wouldn't mean the dollar's collapse, but a significant erosion of its universal dominance. The world is moving from a unipolar to a multipolar monetary system. The transformation is already underway. In mid-2025, the global financial landscape is at a turning point. The US-China rivalry has moved into the wiring of global commerce. CIPS is more than a payment system. It's a tool for a new world order. Its spread across Africa and Asia is redrawing financial maps and challenging American power. The dollar's dominance is deeply entrenched, but the trend toward diversification is accelerating. More countries are seeking alternatives to reduce vulnerability and gain economic sovereignty. China with CIPS is offering a ready-made solution. The big questions: can the US adapt its strategy? Will China reform enough to make the yuan truly global, or will the world fracture into competing blocs? The answers will shape the next decades. The silent war for the world's money is underway. The relationship between money and power is being redefined. The stakes could not be higher.